what's going on is that when everybody acts in their own self-interest, they end up doing what's best for society. You don't need a government, you don't need a boss, you don't need a dictator to tell you what to do. That everybody acting in their own self-interest does what's best for society, right? That's what clears the market, is people responding to incentives. And so that's what Adam Smith means when he uses this phrase, the invisible hand of the marketplace, right? The invisible hand of the marketplace is really prices. And prices are really incentives. They're the incentive to make something or to buy something. And so what Adam Smith really explored here in The Wealth of Nations is really the incentives that lead people to do what's best for society. And one of the things that Adam Smith argued is that if markets are perfectly competitive, then markets will be efficient. They will do what's best for society, right? And so, of course, often associated with Adam Smith and the invisible hand of the marketplace is this idea of laissez-faire, right? And laissez-faire is French for basically hands off. But it's usually referred to as an argument for limited government. The idea that limited government is best for welfare. Why? Because markets are efficient. We don't need a government to tell us what to do and what not to do. Markets create the incentives for people to do things that are in society's best self-interest. So you can't do any better than markets. As a result, what's going to happen if governments get too involved in markets? They're just going to screw things up, right? That's basically the idea of Adam Smith, right? Now, having said that, I've stated the case too strongly, because Smith did believe that there was a role for governments. Oops, sorry, I flipped all the way through here. Smith did believe that there were a role for government. One is to provide education. Another was to provide for national defense. And later we can talk about why Smith believed the government had a role to do with these things. But basically, the reason why Smith believed that government had a role in these is because if there isn't government, we're going to have too little of these things. We're going to have too little education, too little national defense if everybody has to pay for themselves. The government should be involved in subsidizing these things because they are so important. But the third thing, and this is something that many people forget about, particularly conservatives who tend to be more open or more attracted to many of Adam Smith's ideas. But one of the things that Smith thought was very important role for government is breaking up monopolies. And based on our discussion, hopefully you can see why this is so important. Because what's the fundamental assumption for all of this to work? Perfect competition. Without perfect competition, the invisible hand might break down. In other words, there is no guarantee that markets will do what's in the best interest of society if certain players have too much power. For instance, if firms can set their own prices, there's no guarantee that they're going to do it in set prices in the interest of society in general. And same for individuals. Okay, so a fundamental assumption behind most of Adam Smith's thinking is that markets are perfectly competitive and that the government will break up monopolies so that we have perfect competition. So, you know, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here in talking about all these issues, but I do want to establish for you, at least to put this in the back of your mind, because we are going to talk about politics a fair amount in this course. We're going to talk about liberals and conservatives. But when it comes to economic issues, I really think that the fundamental distinction between liberals and conservatives when it comes to economic issues is simply this question of how efficient are markets? Are markets perfectly competitive? In which case, a limited government makes a lot of sense. Or are markets not perfectly competitive? Do markets break down? If they do, then there is a bigger argument for government intervention, right? And so, you know, that is actually, I think, that the fundamental distinction between liberals and conservatives when it comes to economic issues is, you know, to what extent do markets work, and to what extent markets have frictions or markets break down and they need government support, either in terms of breaking up monopolies or providing services that markets fail to provide, right? And so this question we're going to come back to again and again, right, as we go through the class. All right, now, having said that, we have more mundane things to think about for tomorrow, which is the quiz, right? And so in the quiz, I'm going to give you a series of problems, and I'm going to ask you to essentially solve these problems. These are what we call comparative static problems. And so we're going to work through some of these problems. Supply and demand problems here in a minute. But before we do that, I thought I would just give you kind of some steps to think through so that as you work through these problems, you know, these steps will help you kind of think as a way of setting up these problems so that you end up with the right answer, okay? So we're going to work through a series of problems here in which you're essentially given a set of facts, and then you're asked to draw the graph and talk about what happens to price and quantity as a result, okay? So how do we approach these kind of questions? First step, oops. I can't write. You identify the market. In other words, what's the market that we're talking about? You have to be clear about what good are we talking about, right? Second, I'm sorry about that banging. Is it pretty loud? Can you guys hear that? Yeah. However loud it is to you, I'm sure it's about 5 times as loud to me. Okay, so the second step is you want to identify, does supply shift, or does demand shift, or does both shift? Third, which direction does the shift take place? And then finally, remember, if there's a shift in demand, that changes the quantity supplied. or if there's a shift in supply that leads to a change in quantity demanded as price changes. Okay? So whenever you have a shift in demand, that's also going to lead to a movement along your supply curve as price changes. Likewise, if you have a change in supply, that's going to move to a change and move you along your demand curve as price changes. Make sense? A little bit? Okay. Let's do a couple of examples. And, actually, instead of sending you the breakup groups, let's do a couple of examples together, and then I'll send you to breakout groups, and you can do a couple of problems amongst the group. So let's work through a couple of questions together, and I might ask a few of you to kind of jump in here and help me. So how did the discovery of AIDS treatments?
Are these the questions at the end of the chapter?
These questions are not questions at the end of the chapter, but we will do a couple of them. But these are examples like the questions at the end of the chapter. Okay. So the first question that we'll work together as a group is, how did the discovery of AIDS treatments impact the market for condoms? Okay. What can we say about the discovery of treatments for AIDS and its impact on the market for condoms? So let's think about the 4 steps. First step, identify the market. What's the market we're talking about? In this question, I think it's pretty clear, right? Market for condoms.
People who are sexually active.
Yeah, but not everybody who's sexually active is buying a condom, right? I mean, I think this question is pretty clear. First off, the people who are sexually active is not a good. That's not what's being sold, right? What's being sold is condoms, right? So we have a market for condoms, right? In this market, we have a price and quantity, supply and demand. Okay? We're going to assume that this market is perfectly competitive and that we begin in equilibrium. Now, we discover a treatment for AIDS. So step number 2 is, does this impact supply or does this impact demand? What do you think?
Demand.
Demand, right. And why do you say that?
Because we're talking about the demand for condoms, because it's the market for condoms.
Right. Or let me say it this way. Drew, it's you talking? No, or Drew? I'm sorry, who said that?
Jonah.
Jonah, okay. Yeah. So, Jonah, think of those things that we talked about earlier that shift demand. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So, which of those things changed as a result of the finding a treatment for AIDS?
What do you mean?
So, we talked about a number of factors that shift demand.
Right.
Income, price of substitutes, taste, usefulness, number of buyers. Which of those things might have changed?
Maybe price of condoms, or price of treatment, sorry.
Okay, but how is the price of treatments related to condoms?
Wait, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
You said how is the treatment for AIDS related to the market of condoms?
Yes. Or just, okay, let's back up here, right? So you said demand shifted, right?
Right.
I want to be clear exactly why demand shifts.
Because if there's treatment, then maybe people wouldn't use condoms as much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And this is what, yeah. And I think Faith agrees with you. He typed in the chat, people are less scared of getting AIDS, so they think condoms are less valuable to them. Yeah,
Right.
that's how I would answer this, right? In other words, if we put it into one of the categories that we talked about before, this is a decline in usefulness. Condoms are not as useful as they were before because getting AIDS is not a death sentence like it used to be.
Right.
So I would consider that to be a decline in demand, right? Where the demand curve shifts in this direction, shifts to the left. So what's going to happen as a result of this? Price will go down and quantity will go down. But also notice we move along the supply curve as price falls, right? So the decline in demand reduces price, and as price falls, we also see a decline in quantity supplied. So what is our new equilibrium? We have lower price and lower quantity in the end. So when you do examples like this, right, it's always, you know, you want to try to make your thinking as clear to me as possible. Because I'll be honest with you, sometimes these questions can have different answers, right? There's not necessarily just only one way to answer these questions. So you just need to make clear to me that you understand what you're doing, right? That you want to be clear why it shifts, right? You want to say something about why demand went down. You want to clearly label the fact that price goes down and quantity goes down. You want to make clear what was your old demand curve, what's your new demand curve, right? You want to make clear what the market is that you're talking about. These are just all good practices to get into so that I know that you know what you're doing, right? Let's do another example here. Why have the prices of computers consistently dropped since the 1980s? And I should be clear here, at constant quality. In other words, adjusting for what you get, we have essentially seen a 40-year decline in the price of computers. And I think Sunny in the chat's already figured it out, right? First off, what's the market that we're talking about?
Computer.
Right, market for computers. Right, so we have a price and we have a quantity, supply and demand. Here we are in equilibrium. Okay. And so Sunny just said in the chat, technological development. Yes, right? Technological development. One of the interesting things about innovations in computers is as innovations in computers have changed what industry the most dramatically? Making computers. If that makes sense, right? Faster computers have actually made it cheaper to make faster computers. So innovations in better chips and faster chips actually have made it cheaper to make computers. So there's kind of this virtuous cycle here between making faster computers, and as you make faster computers, they allow you to make cheaper and faster computers. Does that impact supply or demand?
Supply.
Supply, right? That's one of the factors that we talked about. And clearly this has increased supply. Which way does an increase in supply? Is it to the right or left?
To the right.
Right.
Right, yeah. That's an increase in supply. Okay, so what happens? Price falls, quantity rises, and notice we move along our demand curve. As the price falls, we move along that old demand curve to a point where quantity is higher. So in other words, as the price falls, people do buy more. But that doesn't shift demand, that just moves us along the demand curve. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. I'm seeing no shaking. Any shaking? Okay. Let's do one more example before we try some more examples in some small groups. I'm going to give you a harder example here. This example is a little bit more complicated. How did mad cow disease impact the UK market for beef? Mad cow disease, maybe this is a little bit before your time. Actually, I never like to think about the years that you guys were born in, because this is disturbing to me. This is very disturbing to me when I actually think about the years you were born in. So many of you may not remember, well, I don't think any of you actually remembered mad cow's disease, but you might have heard about it. Anybody know what mad cow disease is?
Isn't there like something to do with how it like impacts the brain of a cow, so it like makes it go crazy, and it's just like a flesh-eating disease?
Yes, right. And the bad thing about mad cow disease is if you ate a cow that had mad cow disease, you would almost certainly die, right? So in other words, it killed humans, not just cows, it killed humans. And what's the only way that you could treat mad cow disease or deal with it? You had to slaughter the cows, right? There is no medical treatment. You essentially had to dispose and kill all the cows. So in the early 1990s, I think 1993, they had a very severe outbreak of mad cow disease in Britain. So let's think about the market. And here we're going to call the market for UK beef. So we're going to focus specifically on Britain, where the mad cow disease broke out. Okay. So let's think about this one. What happened here in the market for beef? Do we think that supply changed, that demand changed? Could both have changed? Who wants to venture out on the edge of this limb and give me their thoughts about what happened to the market for UK beef?
If they had to dispose of the cows, then wouldn't the supply also change because there'd be less cows?
So, right. Definitely supply had to go down. And in Britain, I think this is true. They basically had to dispose of every single cow in Britain. Right? I don't think that there was anything. They basically had to kill the entire livestock supply in Britain.
Would the demand curve also move because it's a normal good?
Okay, so the demand curve would move. When you say it's a normal good, you mean because income changed?
Oh.
Right? I'm not sure that income has changed. Why would demand go down?
Because people would be scared to get beef, wouldn't they? Because they could die from it.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly, right? If eating a hamburger can kill you, that would be a pretty big disincentive to me to eat a hamburger. And so I think it's also pretty clear that demand went down. So where do we end up? Well, quantity falls, but what can we say about price? Do we know for sure what happened to price? I mean, I drew this as if price went down a little bit, but I could have drawn it this way, where price went up a little bit, right? Do I know for sure what happened to price? No. The best answer here is that price is indeterminate. In other words, we can't tell. We do know that quantity falls, but price is indeterminate. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because when demand falls, that reduces price, but when supply falls, that increases price. So we just don't know. We don't know enough to say what happened to price. Well, at least in the question that I gave you, we don't know enough. In actuality, we do know. Anybody have any guesses about what happened to the price for beef? Did it go up or down?
Plummeted.
Plummeted. Zach says plummeted. No, it went way up.
It went up.
It went up. So what does that suggest? Sorry, lost my screen. That suggests that, looking at our graph, demand went down a little bit, but not nearly as much as supply went down. So strangely enough, this is actually supported in the data. Did people actually cut their consumption of beef? Only a little bit, which shows you how stupid people are. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, right? It is crazy. I remember the 90s much more than you do, but there were a number of newspaper reports and TV reports of people that actually took a great deal of joy in going out and eating a hamburger because it might kill them. So people are strange people. People are strange, right? That surprisingly demand didn't fall by that much, particularly relative to the big decline in supply. And so, but we only know that with additional information. So, if you're faced with a question like this, the best answer is just to say price is indeterminate. In other words, it could go up, it could go down. It depends upon the relative changes in the size, right? It depends on the relative change in the size of the different goods. So, all right. Wow, time is getting away from us. Let's do at least one or two questions in small groups. So I hope that everybody has their book, right? Do we have our books? Hopefully.
Mine just came in the mail today, so I don't have it yet.
Okay.
In the same boat.
Yeah, mine comes in tomorrow.
Okay. So I'm picking a question from the end of the chapter to work through. I guess I'll write this up really quickly. So, question, I'm not going to write this whole question, but let me read this to you, and then I'll break you into breakout groups, okay? So try to listen carefully and take a couple notes, and I'll write a couple notes too. So this is question number 1 at the end of chapter 3. So the question says, a study conducted by Yahoo revealed that chocolate is the most popular flavor of ice cream in America. Each of the following indicate the possible effects on demand, supply, or both on the equilibrium price of chocolate ice cream. Okay, so for all of these, the market is chocolate ice cream. Okay, so A, a drought in the Midwest that causes dairy farmers to reduce the number of milk producing cows by a third. So a drought in the Midwest reduces the number of cows. B, a new report by the American Medical Association reveals that chocolate has significant health benefits. C, the discovery of cheaper synthetic vanilla flavoring, which lowers the price of vanilla ice cream. And D, new technology for mixing and freezing ice cream lowers manufacturers' costs of producing chocolate ice cream. Okay, so those are the 4 questions. So hopefully somebody in your group got all of these down. So I'm going to break you into some breakout groups, okay, of 4 or 5. Join in that, and how about we meet back here in, let's say, 5 minutes, all right? If you can, try to draw a graph for each of these, right, and clearly illustrate what happens to price and quantity, okay? So I'll pull you all back here at 1:47, okay. Faith, I saw your chat that you didn't exist in the 90s, and I'm sorry because the music was much better. You guys have Taylor Swift. We had Nirvana, so sorry. Bryn, you're not buying it?
Well, to be fair, Taylor Swift was born in 1989, so I mean, you did have Taylor Swift.
We just didn't have to listen to her. I know. I would.
Yet to listen to her.
What's with me and Taylor Swift? I don't know. I I actually did not come in today thinking I was going to insult Taylor Swift as much as I've done. So I don't know. I take it all back. I'm sorry, Taylor. I'm sorry. Okay, I think everybody's back here. So I'm just going to kind of call on a couple of you randomly to kind of give your answers to these. And if we'll kind of work through it together if you had a problem with any of them. So a drought in the Midwest reduces the number of cows. So Brenna, do you want to help walk us through this one?
Yeah, so if there's like less of the cows, like the supply is gonna go down, so you move that to the left, and then the price goes up and the quantity goes down.
Right. Yeah, good. So remember, we're talking here in all of these about the market for ice cream.
Yeah.
Right. So because cows and milk are an important input in the making ice cream, obviously. So if there's an increase in the price of an input, then that should reduce supply. And what should happen? The price relative to where we started. Oops. Quantity goes down and price goes up.
Your screen is not shared.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Sonny?
Your screen is not shared.
Oh, gosh, sorry. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so supply goes down, supply shifts to the left, price goes up, quantity goes down, and we move along our demand curve, right? So once again, you want to make clear what happens to price, what happens to quantity. And I would really encourage you to, you don't have to write an essay here, just a couple of words about why you think supply shifted. And that's mainly to make it clear to me what you were thinking, because sometimes some of these questions, they might have alternative answers, right? So, just to say a little bit about why you thought this was the answer can help explain to me a little bit. All right. Question B, a study finds that chocolate improves your health. So Hakeem, do you want to help us with this one?
Sorry, I don't have the textbook yet.
Okay.
I wasn't looking at that.
Do you remember the question?
No.
So the question is, a study finds that chocolate allows you to live longer. So
Okay.
This is the market for chocolate ice cream. What do you think that a study that says that eating chocolate helps you live longer, what impacts that can have on the market?
It increased the demand for it.
Increased demand, right? Because this should be an increase in usefulness. So demand should shift in this direction. Quantity goes up, price goes up. Right? Quantity goes up, price goes up. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And once again, why? I would call this an increase in usefulness, right? Okay, part C. The price of vanilla ice cream goes down because of new innovations. So, Noah, you want to help us with this one?
So the demand for chocolate ice cream would go down. Is that not working? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. So you think that demand goes down. And why does demand go down?
Because vanilla will be cheaper, so people will substitute chocolate for vanilla.
Right. So this would be a decrease in the price of a substitute, right?
Right.
And so when a substitute gets cheaper, that should reduce price. I'm sorry, that should reduce demand. And so price will go down and quantity goes down. Yeah, that sounds like a good answer to me. And then finally, new technology that reduced the cost of making ice cream. So Autumn, you want to help us with this one?
The supply curve would shift to the right. It'd be cheaper to make more.
Right. So this increase in technology increases supply, right? Oops. And so what happens to price? Price goes down, correct, Autumn?
Yes, price goes down and quantity gets higher.
Quantity goes up, right? Yeah, you guys are nailing these. Piece of cake, right? Piece of cake. We're getting close to the end of our time here. Who's up for doing one more of these problems? We got time? Got patience to do one more of these? Yeah, let's try one more as quickly as we can. So this is number 3 at the end of chapter 3. So once again, for those of you who don't have your book, I'll try to read this question to you as much as possible, and then we'll send you in the breakout rooms just for a couple of minutes. So question number 3 says, the market for many goods change in predictable ways according to the time of the year, in response to events such as holidays, vacations, seasonal changes in production, etc. Using supply and demand, explain the change in price in each of the following cases. Note that supply and demand may shift simultaneously. So A says, lobster prices fall during the summer. Can you explain that using a supply and demand graph? B says, Christmas tree prices fall after Christmas. C, the price of airfare to Paris falls after school starts. Despite worst weather. I'm kind of changing this question a little bit, but I'm keeping it simple because we don't all have the book. Okay, so once again, I'm going to send you just to kind of random breakout rooms. Definitely talk through each other about each one of these. I think these are relatively pretty straightforward. Talk through each of these because remember, you might think you know it, but sometimes expressing what you think you know out loud will convince you that you don't know what you think you know. So try to convince each other of these answers, speak through them out loud, write them down, and then I'll bring you all back in 5 minutes and we'll go through it, okay? All right. So here are your breakout rooms. You can go back to the same ones. We'll just do the same ones we did before. All right, we have some tardy rooms here. Okay, I think everybody's back, right? Yeah, I think everybody's back. So, Noah, you want to help us out with the first one here? Lobster prices fall during the summer.
Yeah, so supply would go to the right because they're at the peak season. So they'd have their most lobster then.
Right, and remember, this is one of those questions where you want to make really clear what the market is you're talking about, right? Okay. So you're talking about the market for lobsters, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, a decrease in supply. Wait, What was the question again? Lobster prices go down during the summer, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm sorry, what was your answer?
Supply was increased.
Supply is increased because I don't know. You can tell I don't know anything about lobsters.
Because they were at their peak lobster season, so they had the most amount of lobster at that time.
Okay, is that true?
That's what it said in the book.
Okay, good. I didn't read the question. I have, strangely enough, I have no idea when lobsters mate. That is a piece of information that I've never really thought about before. So, yes. So an increase in supply should reduce price during the summer. Okay, makes sense to me, I guess. So, all right. The second question is Christmas tree prices fall after Christmas. So, Gabe, you want to help us out with this one?
The demand would decrease
Demand-
because it's not in the Christmas season.
It's not in Christmas season, right?
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. I agree. So, yes, demand goes down. Once again, this is the market for Christmas trees. So you always want to make sure clear to me what the market is, right? And so, yes, off season, demand goes down. What should happen to price? It goes down. What happens to quantity? It goes down. All right, very good. And then finally, Zach Stallman, I'm going to ask you to do this one. The price of airfare to Paris falls after school starts, despite worse weather.
For this one, I said the demand went to the left, went down,
Okay.
and then that means the price went down too, and so did the quantity.
Price went down too, and so did quantity. And why do you think that demand fell?
Because it says the worsening weather increased the cost of operating flights to Paris, and then it says therefore reduces the number of flights to Paris at any given price.
Mm-hmm.
So there's less.
Right. So this, yeah, I kind of skimmed through this question when I was reading it to you. But I think what the answer to this question actually is, the full question is, there are less flights to Paris because of weather, so supply goes down. But what happens to price? Price still goes down. Why? Because demand falls by even more. So the number of supply of flights goes down, but demand falls by even more. Why? Because after school starts, parents can't go to Paris without taking their kids and pulling them out of school, right? And so this is one where both supply and demand shift. But in this question, they tell us that the price has to go down, right? And what does that mean? It means that the demand has to fall by more than supply falls, right? So in other words, demand has to go down a lot and supply only a little for the price to go down and not for the price to go up. So anyway, I kind of butchered that question by only reading half of it, right? But you're right. If you read the full question in the book, this is the answer that they were looking for, right? Does that make sense, or did I make too much of a mess of it? Make sense? Okay, so I'm going to let you go here. Before I let you go, let me give you some questions that you could work on at the end of chapter 3. These are not questions that I'm going to collect. You know, if you want to do more problems, I'm just saying these are good ones. Pretty much any question at the end of chapter 3 is a pretty good one. But when I looked through them, I would suggest that if you want some extra practice, questions 2, 7, 12, 15, and 20. Right? 2, 7, 12, 15, and 20 are pretty good ones to work through to get a little bit more practice for the quiz tomorrow. Okay, so remember, I put all the answers to the end of chapter questions on Moodle, so you can get on Moodle and look for the answers there. Just one last thing about the quiz tomorrow. while the quiz will be on the supply and demand problems that we've talked about, they'll also be on everything else we talked about today. So in other words, definitions, concepts, short answers are also going to be possible for the quiz. And so we can have a little bit more time. Faith just asked, is there any homework or just studying for the quiz? The only homework is, get ready for the quiz tomorrow and also to read through chapter 2, all right, which is on comparative advantage. We'll talk about that in the morning. We will also begin chapter 7, right, talking about GDP. And I will send you all an email here in a couple of minutes that has both the assignments for tomorrow, and also it will have links to the videos of today's class, okay? Okay, all right, sorry, went over again. This is the bad habit. But anyway, thank you all, appreciate it. It's kind of a long day. They won't all be this long, but have a good evening, and we'll see you back at 9 a.m., okay? Thanks for everything.